Hello everybody and welcome back to another Overwatch League 2021 roster breakdown and me giving you my thoughts on these rosters. Today we are taking a look at the Toronto Defiant. They finished the 2020 season in the 15 spot with a record of 8-14 minus 16. They were a team I expected to do a lot better last season, but ultimately they did not hit the highs that I had expected them to hit, and they ultimately fell pretty flat as a team. Going into 2021, their roster looks very, very different. So let's talk about these things that they have brought in, the additions they made, and what to expect for them going forward. Let's start with the tank line. They do have one returning player in the tank line. That is Beast. I don't expect Beast to play much, but he did come back to the team. I don't know if it was a kind of change in perspective thing that happened, or if it was just a marketable player type of thing, but he is still on this team, and he may have a small role at times to play, but I don't think he'll have much of a role on this roster. The main tank I expect to see a lot of on the Toronto Defiant is Sado, formerly of the Philadelphia Fusion. He is released from the Fusion and comes over to the Toronto Defiant to play under KDG, who formerly coached the Philadelphia Fusion. He coached the team last season. He is now the head coach for the Toronto Defiant, and he brings with him Sado. Sado had a great season last season, much improved from his 2019 campaign. So, huge addition to this roster. Really good main tank player. One of the top last season in terms of the main tank players. So, somebody who I think brings a lot of really solid play to this team, and I think he has the experience with the head coach, which is going to be something that really benefits his team as well. He doesn't come in with no experience or synergy with this team. You know the head coach. You know how he wants to play. We saw how successful he was in his system last season. I'd expect a lot of the same thing to happen this season. More success for Sado under his good old friend KDG. His off-tank partner is Michelle. Now, Michelle, of course, spent his Overwatch League career the past 2 seasons with the Seoul Dynasty. KDG coached Michelle when he was the Seoul Dynasty coach back in 2019, before, of course, going over to the Philadelphia Fusion. So, an interesting reunion here with Michelle coming to join KDG, and he's going to play alongside Sado. Now, this is a pretty noticeable downgrade, in my opinion, from what you had with Sado last season. He was playing alongside Fury and Poco. I do not believe Michelle is at either of their levels. Michelle did not play a lot last season. When he did, he was okay, but he got replaced by Tuyu, and so I don't expect Michelle to be a really star off-tank player. I thought he was fine in 2019. I thought the thing that went his way the most was that he was able to play the Sombra as well. So he had more versatility and more flexibility as a player, and that's really what kind of made him stand out. If you remember the Nene Grav was because of Michelle on Sombra. So it is a very interesting signing. I do not have a ton of confidence in Michelle as an elite level off tank. I think he might be average to slightly below average. I don't think he's going to be an above average or exceptional off tank talent. I hope I'm wrong, because I would love to see Michelle pop off, back with the coach that he performed his best with back in 2019, and alongside a really good main tank player in Sado. Michelle's had some very good main tank partners. Obviously, he played alongside Marvel, he played alongside Fissure, he played alongside Gesture, so he has had some big names alongside him, but he just has not looked as strong as a lot of these other off-tanks in the league. There's a lot of really good young off-tanks, I mean, Gable Shi is one of the ones who I think is a really interesting player who isn't signed to an Overwatch League roster right now. I think for the Toronto Defiant, you would jump at the opportunity to steal him from the Uprising Academy if the opportunity arose and the option came up. So I think it's an interesting tank line. I don't expect it to be elite. I expect there to be some problems and some growing pains with it. I think Sada will be fine. Michelle is the player that I'm worried about. And I think that ultimately how well this team performs comes down to how good Michelle is in that off-tank role. I think he has the opportunity to be... Let me rephrase this. I think Michelle is good enough, has the potential to be a solid, sturdy, middle-of-the-pack off-tank who does not actively hurt this Defiant team. That, to me, is the goal with Michelle. If you can get a ton out of Michelle where he is a playmaker, he's going out and dominating week in and week out, you have done a really good job. I don't think that's Michelle. I don't think that's his play style. And I think that is the biggest concern, in my opinion, for the team as a whole. This is where I think they are the weakest, is the off-tank role. And I think that how well Michelle plays ultimately determines how good this roster is. He's the only off-tank on the team. He has to play well, because if he does not play well, I think they're going to struggle more. But I don't think he's going to hold this team back too much, because I think he has proven himself enough in the Overwatch League that he is not a liability. And I think that we are seeing that he is a player capable of putting up good performances when they matter the most. He hasn't had a ton of those moments, but with the Defiant, maybe a fresh start back with the head coach he knows the best, and who he had his best performances under. Maybe that will be the thing that helps them do their best work. So we'll see what happens. Moving on to the support line. This, I think, is the strength of this roster. This is where I think they will be at their best all season. Their main support is Ansun Jae, most recently playing for Element Mystic. He was with them for most of 2020, so he didn't play with them when they were at their peak, back in the old days of Rush. At this point in time, Rush was already with the Paris Eternal, along with Sparkle and Hanbin, Xe. But he did play for the Element Mystic team when they were doing pretty well in 2020. He's your main support player. He brings your strong Lucio play, your strong Mercy play. He's got a pretty good Brigitte as well. So I think he is a very good addition. To me, in my opinion, there were not a ton of great main supports coming out of Korea this season. There were some pretty good ones, but I thought this was actually one of the weaker positions that existed coming out of Korea this season. I'm trying to think how many Korean main supports were added to teams this season that were rookies. I know, obviously, you have Ansun Jae here. You have Friday on the NYXL, and you have Faith on the Boston Uprising. Other than that, I don't know if there are any other rookie Korean main supports coming out of Korea. So I think it is an interesting thing to see. So I don't know which of those three will be the best. I think there's a good chance that it's Ansun Jae. I think he is the one who's had the most notable performances, and he's the one who's had the best career in contenders recently. So I'm interested to see him. What I think is more interesting, and where I think you really see how good this team is on the support line, it is with their flex supports. You have Aztac and you have Lastro. Lastro, of course, formerly playing for the LA Valiant. After that team disintegrated, dissolved, and fell apart, Lastro finds his way to the Toronto Defiant. Aztac most recently played with Uprising Academy and World Game Star on a loan to World Game Star, and he was with the Uprising Academy before that. Very good player. I saw a lot of people who said things about how they thought that the Boston Uprising would move on from Myeonbong to bring in Aztac. I never thought that was going to be the option, because I thought Myeonbong was a very good player. We have seen Aztec perform at a high level. He played with World GameStar for a time. Obviously, World GameStar was a very good team in Korea over the past year. So you bring in a very good main support or flex support player in Aztec. And then you get to bring in Lastro later on. Mr. SBD himself comes into this team, and I think this is a huge, huge, huge pickup. It's interesting to me when you have a flex tank or a flex support player as good as Aztec. It's very interesting to me when you look at that and you say, hey, you bring in Lastro. You could have brought in someone like Rain, who I thought was pretty good, but, was he the best? Maybe not. But Lastro is a very good player. And when you look at a team like the San Francisco Shock, who have Twilight and Violet, and they run those two a lot in certain compositions, BAP Ana compositions specifically come to mind as the ones they would run them in the most. We saw how effective two really good flex supports can be. And I think if you're going to get two support players, you need a second flex support. I've always felt that way. At least for the past couple of seasons, I felt like that really is where you need to have your strength, because you're very rarely going to come across a meta where you need to have Lucio and Mercy. That's almost never going to happen. But the chances of you needing a BAP Zen composition or a BAP Ana composition or even like a BAP Brig, where a lot of your flex support players know how to play the Brig and the BAP, and they're some of the best at that role. So having Lastro and Aztec opens up a ton of options for this team. I genuinely wouldn't be surprised if Ansun Jae plays Lucio, and that is it. Now, we might see a lot of Lucio, or Lucio and Mercy. We might see a lot of Lucio. We might not see a lot of Lucio. If we see a lot of BAP Ana and BAP Zen compositions, I wouldn't be surprised if we see a lot of Lastro and Aztec. The Brig, I think, could go either way. I think Ansun Jae probably ends up being their primary Brig player if Brig is meta. I don't think she will be. She hasn't been very good at the high level recently, so we'll see what happens, I suppose. But this is a very good support line, and it is 100% the strength of this roster. When you can bring in Lastro to play alongside somebody already as good as Aztec, and you have Ansun Jae, you have a three-piece triangle in your DP or your support line, which is already really, really good and is going to have a ton of really high potential. And I think they are going to be an incredible duo, no matter which two they have in. And I think it's going to be a really solid roster. I don't even know how to predict between Lastro and Aztec who gets the start. I feel like it'll probably be Lastro, just because he has shown himself at the higher level recently. There's a reason you go after Lastro, but it's a really good team, and those are some very good players to have on your support line, and I think that is ultimately what their success will ride on. I think they have to play a lot around their support line, and a big part of why I feel that way is because when you get to their DPS line, their third and final area, I don't feel the best about this DPS line. Logix returns, of course. He is the only Western DPS player on this roster. He and Beast are the only two Western players on this roster. It's a predominantly Korean roster that I expect will come predominantly in Korean. Logix, I think, is going to be your double sniper specialist, maybe even your Widowmaker specialist. You do also have Hisu on this roster, of course, formerly of the Philadelphia Fusion. When KDG becomes the head coach of the Toronto Defiant, he brings with him not only Sato, but also Hisu. A lot of reasons why Hisu may have left could have been that he didn't want to sit behind Carpe or whatever. He wanted to be the number one guy, and I think Hisu has that talent to be the number one guy. I think Logix's primary position on this team is going to be when they need the double hit scan. We know Hisu is a very good Sombra, one of the best in the league last season, so you expect that he is going to be the Sombra player when they need one, and if they need a Widowmaker or a McCree or an Ashe alongside that Sombra, that's the type of situation you'll see Logix play. I think for the most part, this team is going to run Hisu and Naced, who has played in contenders for a number of different teams, starting back in Korea with Metabellum, then playing with Fusion University, and then T1 when they rebranded for, from November of 2018 until December of 2020. He stayed within that organization for 2 years. He stayed within that Fusion T1 organization, which means that he has familiarity with KDG. At least you would assume that he has familiarity with KDG if he was playing with the Fusion University guys and he was playing with T1 this past year. You can assume there probably were some kind of scrims there, some relationships there, some things going on with that team. But Nace is your flex DPS player. He's going to be the one who's playing the Genji, the Pharah, the Mei. He even plays some Tracer at a high level, which is a good thing to see. Hisu's Tracer, not super great. Logix is a pretty good Tracer, but I'd expect Nace primarily to be the Tracer for this team because it makes the most sense when you have him alongside Hisu. This DPS line is pretty good. I don't think it covers everything there is, which is where I get concerned. I think there's some clear limitations. I love Logix as a player. I think Logix is a fantastic player. He's a fantastic hit scan player. He's one of the best snipers in the league. His place on this team is very niche, and I think that's a big problem. He's really only going to play on the map like Junkertown, where you know you can run Widowmaker the whole map, or any situation where there is a double sniper composition and they need that second hit scan player. In most situations, you're going to run Hisu. And even on something like Junkertown, you're probably still going to run Hisu for the most part anyway. So you have to ask yourself, looking at this team, where are they lacking? And I know that there's been a lot of people who have brought up in the past that teams with 4 DPS players are going to struggle to use them all. But I think if you have DPS players in specialist roles, it's fine. But when you have 3 DPS players, and one of those is a specialist, I think you're going to meet some struggles. As good as Hisu and Nace are, they're both very good players. I have major concerns about their performances. Nace is a player who had some pretty good performances in contenders for a while, but T1 has not been a great team recently. They did not do well in the last 2 seasons of contenders. They did okay in some of the tournaments back in the beginning of 2020, and even you go back to 2019, they did well in the Atlantic Showdown. They were Fusion University, they were still in America, but when they went to Korea, they really started to struggle for the most part. And so I think Nace is good. He's a strong player. I don't know how good he's going to be, and I worry about this team in metas where they can't run a Tracer, Tracer Widow or something like that. I don't feel super confident in this team if they have to run like a Tracer Genji, because that means you're putting in Logix and Nace most likely. I don't feel amazing about that duo. Maybe I'm wrong. And it's less about Logix as a player. It's more so that the team is a mostly Korean team with a couple of Western players that they might, plug and play every so often when the time is right. This is a team that I think is very interesting. I think they have a lot of the talent that you need to be successful. But the thing that keeps me from saying this is a super team, this is a really good team that's punching with the likes of the Dallas Fuels and the Washington Justices and the Shocks and the Gladiators of the North American region is that they just don't have what I want in terms of... There's a lot of questions about this team. How good is Michelle going to be, right? Is he going to be able to keep up with the rest of the really good off-tanks that are around the Overwatch League? I'm a little skeptical. I'm a little concerned about him as a player and how good he's going to be with this team as a whole. I have concerns about this DPS line and the flexibility of the DPS line and the seemingly large overlap from a lot of the players, especially Logix and Hisu play pretty much all the same stuff. A couple differences, Hisu has the Sombra, Logix is the Tracer. They also have Nace who plays the Tracer. So how are they going to make that all work between those 3 players? Will they need to go out and find another DPS player? The support line, I feel very good about it. I think that the support line is the strength of this roster. So long as that support line can perform at a high level, I think the Defiant can patch up a lot of those other issues that they've had. I think Sato's performances last season were enhanced greatly by how good his support line was. And I think when you give him another really good support line with a head coach that he knows, I think Sato will continue to take those steps up and up and up. He was a very raw player when he came into the league in 2018. Did not have a ton of play time in 2018 because of his suspension for the first 3 stages of the season. Comes in 2019, his first full season, a little raw, but 2020 was really, I think, Sato's boost and jump where he really started to make his kind of climb. He never played professionally before he joined the Overwatch League, so it's a very interesting team with a lot of interesting pieces. I think they have the potential to be one of the teams that's punching for the top and swinging for the top. But my big issue with this team is that they don't have a lot of the championship caliber players who have found a consistent success on the best teams in all areas recently. Yes, the Seoul Dynasty made the grand finals last year. Michelle barely played last season. Yes, the Philadelphia Fusion were the top team in North America during the regular season, second best record overall in the league, made the grand finals weekend. They did not perform very well when they got there, and even back in 2018 when they made the grand finals, they won one map. You know, the Philadelphia Fusion won no tournaments last season. You have Lastra, who played in the Overwatch League last season, didn't do a ton with that Valiant team. They didn't get very far. Logix doesn't have a ton of that success, so these are a lot of players who are still proving themselves, who still have a lot to prove. And while I think that this is a very talented team on paper, there's a lot of little cracks that I think hold this team back from being one of those elite teams. They're by no means a bottom-level team. I don't think they will struggle against some teams, I don't want to get too into who I think is really good and not as good, but they are going to be competitive with those middle-of-the-pack teams. I think they will find relatively consistent success against your lower-level teams, but it's that kind of question of can they get good enough to punch up that, at the moment, I'm not sure. But those are my thoughts on the Toronto Defiant for 2021. Let me know your thoughts on the team in the comments down below. If you agree with me, disagree with me, whatever you think, I would love to hear from you. But that is all from me today. If you enjoyed this video, consider liking and subscribing for more content like this in the future. But I am going to get out of here. Thank you once again. I hope you are all staying safe and staying healthy. And until next time, bye-bye.